The next 4 weeks, the readings of the church ask us to look at ultimate things. And sometimes ultimate things are hard to look at. We're going to be doing a series homily. Our homily series is called You're Dead, So Now What? Because death is one of those burdens that most of us try to avoid thinking about. You know, we're more than happy to talk about the birth of a child or our marriage or what's going on in our life, but we don't want to talk about death until it's thrust upon us. And maybe that's because in our society, you know, most of us, not all, some have had the experience of loved ones very young passing away, or maybe they're in their early years, a son or a daughter has passed away. Many of us have had that experience, but that is far less common than it used to be. And most of us think, okay, it's going to happen to me, but it's somewhere out there. I can tell you as a priest that I'll be called into a hospital room, and mother or father is like 97 years old, and they'll say, don't tell them they're getting the last rites. It might scare them. But listening to the word of God that we've heard today, which is very intimidating if you are a priest, if you are a pastor of a parish, you know, as my example, one that is living out the faith that I'm proclaiming, am I helping to lift burdens off people? I have an obligation as pastor to help lift the burden of taking the fear of death away. Because there's an old-fashioned phrase that people used to pray for all the time. They prayed for a happy death. See, we don't need to be scared of death. Death does not need to be an experience merely associated with mourning. It can also be, when prepared and done well, it can be an experience of joy. Now, some of you may come here and say, boy, did I choose the wrong week to come here for a homily at St. Bede's. They're going to start talking about death for four weeks. I think that some of us also, we think that it's so unreal that, okay, well, yeah, we hope that we get out of here, but when we think about death, all we're really thinking about is, I hope I get through it without much pain. But that's not the end. What we realize is that this life has more to it. When we think about it, God, the way God created the world, He created everything in this world that we could realize its fulfillment in this world as well. He gave us hunger, and then He also gave us food. He gave us thirst, and He also gave us water. He gave us the need for intimacy, and He gave us marriage. He gave us all of these things, including a desire to live forever. Now, all of us will experience birth, and all of us will experience death. But what do we say about that desire that is built in us? That God also gives that to us because He also wants to fulfill it. So I'm dead. Now what? Well, traditionally, the answer has been in Catholic teaching. There are three options: hell, purgatory, or heaven. It's not Jeopardy. It's not Wheel of Fortune. Spin the wheel and see which one you land on. See, we might think that God must be a horrible God to create a place of punishment and death for us. And we would be right if that's what it really was. But God did not create hell for us, primarily. He created hell for the evil, which we call the devil. He created it as a place for those who are opposed to his plan to bring all things to himself. So God doesn't send anyone to hell. But God has given us free choice. He wants us to love him freely. And so he takes the risk that we, with our lives, will make the ultimate mistake and say, thank you very much, but no, I don't want that. See, it's not that he doesn't want us, but he wants us to say yes to him freely with all our heart. He is not a puppet master. He's someone who has an invitation of love. And you know you can't force anybody to love you, right? You always have to respond in love. And so ultimately, with the grace of God, we can respond, and hell doesn't have to be an option. But why do I believe in hell? Because it's in the Bible. Because it's there, and I realize that it is a possibility for me. I pray, and St. John Paul II said, we can hope that no one's in hell. And sometimes people have a favorite game. Well, I don't know about others, but I know so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so are going to hell. We sometimes have that game with ourselves. But the burden that we don't have to be afraid of hell. Because remember, praying for a happy death is to be in the state of grace. To pray, to prepare ourselves, to use the sacrament of confession often. When we're ill, use the sacrament of of anointing of the sick. And when we're near death, ask the church to gather around us in prayer. Ask your family and friends to gather around you in prayer. When we have that relationship with God, we don't need to be afraid of hell. Purgatory. What's that about? It sounds like a do-over place. And that's not what it's about either. It's about that final preparation to be with the Lord. Because I don't know about you, but I know in my life I've made decisions that have not looked exactly like the face of Jesus Christ. And I know that I do penance. I use the sacrament of reconciliation. But I also know, like a child in the woods, that I've created certain paths and certain consequences when I go through that woods every time. When you go through that wood time after time, you create a path. And even though that path shouldn't be there, I have to kind of deal with it. And so purgatory is that place where we leave everything behind that doesn't look exactly like Jesus. It's a final healing that God does for us. We don't need to be afraid of purgatory because every soul in purgatory will also be in heaven. But we also need to prepare. Now, in this homily series, we're going to talk about heaven. But that's the next 2 weeks. What I'm going to offer you today, in terms of lifting this burden, I want you to think about your own death. And I want you to write a spiritual testament. How has God acted in your life? What is the meaning of your life? And how can we offer that to God? There's a student at the North American College who died in 1920. His name is Frank Parader. He's a seminarian of this diocese, and he is a servant of God, and his cause is on the way to, we hope, one day for beatification. And when he died, a testament was found in his room. And I'm not going to read the whole testament to you. But he said, I love my life here in the college. I love my life in the Diocese of Richmond, and I believe that God has sent me to in mission to this diocese. But I also long to be with Jesus, and I know I will never have less to answer for than I have right now. So I pray, not from any morbid fear, but from a desire to be with the Lord, that this Good Friday, 1922, that I might have the privilege to be with the Lord, surrounded by St. John Bergisman, St. Stanislaus Kostka, and St. Aloysius Gonzaga, other young seminarian saints. He wrote that without any idea that he would be ill and die that Lent. He offered his life as a gift. And so, therefore, when death came, he understood it as a joy to be with the Lord. I know this is hard stuff, but I'm hoping through this next 4 weeks that as we look at death, purgatory, judgment, heaven, that fear would be taken off us, that the burden might be lifted. And that really is the job of the priest, is to help lift that burden so that we might live our life as disciples in grace and courage and love.